killer in jail. It was the worst mistake I ever made. I'll try to keep this concise, given that I'm in serious need of timely advice. I'm a college-bound high school senior, and since I'm about to be in debt for the rest of my life, I decided a few weeks ago to pick up a summer job. My friend Liam and I both found part-time positions at an ice cream store in town. Not the best-paying job, but our schedules were flexible, and given the popularity, or lack thereof, of the shop, we basically got to sit on our asses all day and play video games on Liam's Steam Deck. The job did have one downside, though, which was the shop's owner, Fred. Fred was an older guy, probably in his 60s. I have no clue where he came from or what he did before moving into my town 5 years ago, but from the way he carried himself, I always thought he had a military background. He was tall and wiry and had this stare that felt like he was peeling back your skin with his eyes alone. I had no idea what a guy like that was doing running a kitschy little ice cream shop called Sunday Central, but the events of the past few weeks have given me some theories. So a few hours before our first 4 to 10 p.m. shift, Fred gave Liam and me a tour. The shop was too small for its own cold room, and so the back room had 2 standing freezers. It also had one giant chest freezer, which, as I learned a few days later, was locked. When I asked Fred about it, he told me that it was for surplus inventory, and I didn't really care enough to inquire further. The last thing Fred told us was to be wary of a homeless woman who sometimes begged outside of the store and had been known to be aggressive. Fred watched Liam and me closely throughout our first shift, which luckily went off without a hitch. At 10 p.m. sharp, he told us to grab our things and go. Apparently, Fred liked to clean and close up shop himself. "Bro, that guy's kinda weird, right?" Liam asked me that night as we carpooled back to our neighborhood. I shrugged. I didn't have much of an opinion on our boss yet. "I used to live in the same apartment building as him before we moved," he continued. "I ran into him a lot in the parking garage. He always had some kind of animal with him. Dogs, cats, sometimes even a trap with a raccoon or a possum inside. I figured he worked at some kind of animal rescue or something. Maybe he catches stray animals and takes them to the vet, like for sterilization and stuff. Yeah, maybe." Liam's observation was strange, but all in all, Fred seemed normal enough to me. A little aloof, sure, but I was happy to look past that as long as he was paying us. I dropped Liam off that night and didn't think much about those animals for a while. The first few weeks on the job were more stressful than anticipated. Aside from all the screaming children and entitled parents, I eventually encountered the woman that Fred had warned us about. The first time I saw her, I was working the closing shift alone while Liam was at a concert with his girlfriend. My car was a block away from Sunday Central, and as I walked down the poorly lit street, I got the sense that I was being watched. I turned to look at the shrubs lining the sidewalk and was greeted by the last thing I expected to see crouched inside the hedges. A person. I barely saw her with all the branches twisting around her body, but once I noticed her sallow, expressionless face, I realized that she was looking right at me. I was so surprised that I tripped on a crack in the sidewalk and damn near broke my wrist. By the time I stood up and shook off my embarrassment, she was gone. Liam and I saw her every once in a while after that. She wasn't aggressive like Fred had mentioned, nor did she bother our customers at all. She kept to herself and largely out of sight, but even so, I came to dread being in the shop after sunset. I got into the habit of standing by the front windows when there was a lull in our customer stream. I would stare out into the night and look for the woman. It would always take me a few minutes, but often I would eventually find someone looking back at me. She was always partially obscured, either by trees or street lamps or dumpsters. It felt like she was playing a game with me, like some kind of demented Where's Waldo. On the nights where I didn't find her, I always wondered if she hadn't paid us a visit, or if I simply hadn't looked hard enough. 1 week ago, as soon as I pulled into my driveway after work, I realized that I had left my wallet in my work locker. Since I was going out with friends the following morning, I opted to drive back to Sunday Central immediately as opposed to waiting until the next day. It was almost 11 when I pulled up next to the shop, and I remember being surprised by how abandoned the street looked once all the businesses closed for the day. Only when I exited my car did I realize that the shop would probably be locked up. Sure enough, the front door handle didn't budge. I decided to try the back door before I gave up entirely. I rounded the building and approached our back door, and to my delight I found that it was unlocked. At that point, I was too relieved to consider how strange that was. I opened the door and slipped through, turning my phone flashlight on so that I could navigate in the dark. Sunday Central is set up like this. Most of the building is occupied by a large room that holds the serving counter and dining area for the customers. Behind the serving counter is a hallway that leads to the back door to the shop. On one side of the hallway is the bathroom and break room, and on the other side is the freezer room. Once I entered through the back door, I turned into the break room. For some reason, I didn't want to turn on the lights. If the back door was unlocked, then Fred might still be around somewhere, and the thought of running into him in the middle of the night gave me the creeps. I just wanted to grab my wallet and slip back out as quickly as I could. Luckily, my wallet was exactly where I thought I'd left it. I grabbed it, put it in my pocket, and was just about to leave before I heard the back door open. Shit, I thought. If that was Fred and he found me snooping around with all the lights off, he'd probably think I was robbing the place. Could I be arrested for trespassing at my own place of employ? I wasn't in the mood to find out. Not knowing what else to do, I gently closed the locker and dove behind the break room couch. From my hiding place, if I peered around the side of the couch, I could see right across the hallway to the door to the freezer room. The hallway lights clicked on and footsteps echoed through the quiet shop as Fred ambled into view. He looked tired, his expression downcast and his gait slow. He was wearing a clear plastic poncho, which I found strange, but any thoughts I might have had on his attire, I immediately forgot when I saw what he was dragging across the floor behind him. It was a body. A woman's body, nude and either unconscious or dead. Fred was holding her, by the hair in one of his gloved hands. He pushed open the door to the freezer room and turned on the lights, and immediately I could tell he was holding a corpse by the hue of its skin and the rigidity of its limbs. I bit back a gasp as I watched him drag it into the room. Just after he crossed the threshold, part of the corpse's scalp detached from its skull. It fell from his grasp, flopping onto the floor with a thud, leaving Fred holding a fistful of long brunette hair. He cursed to himself, turning around and leaning over to pick up the body. I ducked behind the couch, watching his feet through the small gap between the couch and the floor. His hand stilled on the corpse's neck, and I figured he'd just noticed the open door to the break room. I held my breath, praying he'd let it go, but instead he straightened and stepped over the body. I watched his shoes cross the hallway, coming to a stop in the doorway. He reached inside and switched on the lights. I readied myself for a fight, figuring that if I couldn't incapacitate Fred, maybe I could at least injure him badly enough that he'd be a suspect when people realized I'd disappeared. Luckily for me, it never came to that. A small, barely audible knock sounded through the quiet shop, and Fred reacted immediately. He turned his attention back towards the corpse, picking it up off of the floor and making his way towards the front of the store. As soon as he was out of sight, I crawled out from behind the couch. I looked down the hallway in both directions, and when I didn't see Fred, I bolted for the back door. I ran to my car like my life depended on it, which, as far as I knew, it did. I drove straight to the police station to file a report. I probably should have waited to get my thoughts in order, but I was so hopped up on adrenaline that I barged right in and gave what was probably a completely incoherent account of my night. Understandably, the officers didn't seem to believe me at first, but the more questions they asked, the more seriously they took my story. I'm sure that dropping the name Frederick Braun helped my case. Liam wasn't the only one who thought Fred was a little off. He'd long been something of an outsider in our town, and it's likely because of his reputation that the police agreed to investigate the scene. They found 7 corpses in Sunday Central, though none belonged to a human. Squished together in the locked chest freezer were 2 cats, a raccoon, a coyote, and 3 dogs, one of which I recognized as a neighbor's pet from lost posters I'd seen stapled to telephone poles. The discovery sent the town into an uproar. Fred was arrested the following morning, and needless to say, our ice cream shop was shut down. The police said they'd do some DNA testing on the crime scene to identify the woman I saw. Of course, I was happy that something was being done, but I didn't have high hopes for our tiny, underfunded police department. At least I could rest easy knowing I'd helped put a criminal in jail, even though I got the sense there was more to the story. Fred was arrested 6 days ago. 3 days after the incident, Liam and I were driving home from a friend's house across town. Our route took us past Sunday Central, and Liam slowed down to gawk at the yellow tape adorning our former workplace. Only when we were a few buildings away did I notice a person standing on the street across from Sunday Central. "Dude, holy shit," I said, pointing to the figure. "It's that woman." When Liam saw her, he did just about the last thing I wanted him to do and pulled over right in front of her. He came to a stop and, despite my protests, rolled down my window to talk to her. The woman was standing on the sidewalk, maybe 2 feet away from the passenger's side door. I shrunk back in my seat, horrified by the prospect that she could reach right through the open window if she wanted to. "Hey, lady," Liam said. "We're closed." This was by far the closest I'd ever been to the woman. At a glance, she was pretty normal looking. Pale skin, dark hair, brown eyes. Or were they brown? Her irises looked faintly reddish in the poor lighting, maybe the result of some kind of infection. She was wearing a nondescript black dress that seemed too pristine for someone I assumed had been living on the street. She didn't look at us when we pulled up next to her, didn't move a muscle. In all the times I'd noticed her staring at me, had I ever seen her move? "Hello?" Liam continued. "No ice cream today. Or tomorrow. Or ever, probably. Our boss might have been a serial killer. You hear anything about that?" He elbowed my arm like he was trying to get me in on the joke, but I barely registered his words. I couldn't look away from the woman's face, which, before my eyes, seemed to shift. I'm not exactly sure what I saw or how best to describe it. Have you ever stared into a mirror in a dimly lit room? If you stare at your face long enough, your brain starts playing tricks on you. Your features start to distort. You start seeing someone else. A family member, a stranger, something different, something wrong. That's the best analogy I can give for what I felt in the moment. All of a sudden, I got the sense that the person I was looking at wasn't a person at all. The woman's eyes flicked from the storefront to Liam's face. "Dude, drive," I said, reaching out to roll up the window. "But drive," I practically screamed right into his face. Grumbling, Liam slammed on the gas and took us screeching down the road. I turned in my seat to watch the woman as we left. She didn't move an inch all the while. Call me a coward if you want, but between that encounter and what I'd witnessed at Sunday Central, I haven't been eager to leave my house for the past few days. Even now, as I write this, the memory of that woman makes me feel ill. I've never, in my entire life, seen something so uncanny, and the fact that Liam didn't notice anything made me feel like I was losing it. I mean, I'd just seen my boss dragging someone's dead body across the floor of an ice cream shop. Some degree of paranoia wouldn't be all that out of the question. For the past few days, I've been staying at home with my grandma, playing cards with her and keeping an eye on the news. It took days for the police to make any headway on the Frederick Braun case, but yesterday morning they seemed to have finally made a breakthrough. From a strand of hair left on the floor at Sunday Central, they were able to identify the body I'd seen as 34-year-old Alicia Winters. The only problem, Alicia Winters died 4 days before the incident. She'd been involved in a fatal car crash and was 6 feet underground in our town cemetery. Or at least, she should have been. When police exhumed her grave, they found an empty casket. Alicia's grave wasn't the only one that had been disturbed. Investigative efforts turned fully towards the cemetery, where it was found that several other graves had fallen victim to unauthorized disinterment. At the time of writing this, they found 8 empty caskets, and I have a feeling that the number will continue to rise. I had trouble wrapping my head around the news. What motive could Frederick possibly have had for killing those animals and stealing those corpses? How long has all of this been going on? And maybe the most important question of all, where were the corpses? I got a phone call last night. I'd already passed out in front of the TV, and was awoken by my cell phone vibrating in my pocket. It was 4 in the morning when I picked up Liam's call. "Hello?" I asked groggily. She's at a bedroom window." I sat bolt upright. "Who?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "I just woke up and she's just standing outside." "You have to call the police. Are your parents there?" "My parents and sister." His voice was shaky and small. I've never seen a person with teeth like this." "Liam, you gotta call the police, man. Wake up your parents and call the police right now." He sucked in a sharp breath. "Okay, yeah, I'll call the police. Text me when they get there, okay?" "I will." He hung up after that, and I was alone in the quiet dark again. I don't know what I was thinking. I shouldn't have let him go. I should have called the police on his behalf. Instead, I waited for a text that never came. For hours, I sat on the couch looking at my reflection in the TV screen in front of me, watching my face distort into something foreign, something inhuman. In the morning, the light streaming in through the living room windows broke me out of my trance. I forced myself to get up and to get in the car, and I drove like a maniac to Liam's house. We were such good friends, you know. I had my own set of keys to his place. His parents joked that I was their second son. The adult human skeleton has 206 bones. I found maybe 40 of them. Vertebrae splintered and stuck in his mattress. Half a rib cage discarded on his floor. Something long, maybe a femur or a tibia, embedded in his wall. How strange it was that for all the carnage, all those scratches and dents in the floor and ceiling, I didn't see a drop of blood. His parents and younger sister were in a similar state. I didn't find them myself. I called the police after seeing what I saw in Liam's room, but I could tell from the officers' expressions that they had been similarly brutalized. They took me in for questioning, of course, since I've now been found at the center of 2 crime scenes, but I doubt I offered them any valuable answers. I don't know what has descended upon my town. I don't know exactly what it did to Liam's family or why, but I suspect that the person with all the answers, the person who was protecting my town all this time without anyone knowing, is currently behind bars because of me. Maybe I can find a way to talk to him. Maybe I can find a way to convince everyone of his innocence. If not, then I'll have to take matters into my own hands. I'll have to feed the monster I set free. Thank you for listening and delving into the dark with me. I would be so grateful if you please click the thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment. The more engagement this video gets, the more YouTube will push my content to others, and thus our twisted little community will grow. All stories read on this channel will be available on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and many other podcast apps. Links are in the description. Thank you again for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you.